Hey guys, so this is our mini lesson today. And before we get started, what I would like for you, I just realized I'm not sharing my screen. Time to share screen. Okay, there we go. And before we get started, what I would like for you to do is to check in, and you can answer out loud or type into the chat, or you can type just to me. How do you feel today? Take a look at the Muppets. What Muppet are you today? And I'll get started. I'm feeling really weird. So I'm like gonzo weird. I'm like gonzo weird here. Okay. Thank you for sharing. And welcome to class. There's just a few things I want to tell you before we get started. It's okay to be wrong while we learn. So I'm going to be asking you some questions. In fact, there will be 5 questions throughout this entire class. And I just want you to know that it's okay if you mess up. We're going to be brainstorming, you're going to be sharing ideas and supporting each other. And please let me know if I'm going too fast. Today's lesson is about a rather complex but very common environmental problem that begins with farming practices. And I want you to, and you might know what it is, you might know something about this, but I just want you to dig deep and this is more about your ability to reason. It's not about necessarily getting the right answer, but we're going to work our way there ourselves. So this is how it begins. First, farmers spread fertilizer on their crops in order to make the crops grow. Okay, simple enough. Often a chemical, or it could be organic, or it could be a synthetic fertilizer. Then what happens next? The fertilizer that is sprayed on the plants gets washed away by the rain. And it can either, these chemicals, which have a lot of nutrients in them so that the plants can grow, they either stay on top of the ground and run off somewhere, or they can seep in deep into the ground. So that's 2. Number 3. Then the fertilizer makes its way somehow into a body of water, and it can do this above ground, or this could happen underground, actually. And see this little picture, you can see the little lumps of brown getting into the body of water. So basically, a whole ton of nutrients are going into the water. And this could be in the ocean, it could be a lake, it could be a river, it could be anything. So this is contributing to something called, this is part of surface runoff. So if you look at the picture here, you can see that we have there's sewage, there's a lot of different sources of pollution from surface runoff. And what we're looking at right here, you can see these crops, and these nutrients from the crops are getting into the water. So what do you think happens next? So here's your first question of the day. And it's okay to be wrong as you learn. I often tell my students that it's not about what you can look up, it's about your reasoning skills. So I just want you to think about this. You can talk out loud, or if you want to type in the chat or type just to me, either way, I encourage you to share out loud. So I'll give you a couple of minutes. Go for it. Okay, good discussion going on. So here is my version. This is what happens next. So now we're on to number 4. So all those fantastic, awesome nutrients get into the water, and a bunch of algae grows. So algae is like, some people think a lot of algae is microscopic. It's like very tiny plants in the water. It can kind of look like seaweed sometimes. There's many different species of algae. But when all those nutrients get into the water, the algae overgrows big time, usually collects on the surface. And that's really, really bad. Why do you think that's bad? And I want you to brainstorm like you did before. Go for it. Good discussion. So just to let you guys know, when you have this overgrowth of algae, it's called an algal bloom. And it can look like what you see here in the picture. It doesn't always look like this. And it's not just about the algae, which we're going to talk about in a second. It's definitely like gooey. So this is why the overgrowth of algae is so bad. As you can see in the picture, the algae is like a blanket covering the top of the water. So the sunlight can't get through the water to the plants at the bottom that need it to conduct photosynthesis. So they die. And when they die, and they are using up oxygen in the water, this is called hypoxia. And finally, then the algae on the top dies. Now, when you have all that death in the water, you have lots of bacteria that decomposes all those dead things. And that uses up even more oxygen. And not only that, but now you have tons and tons of bacteria in the water. And then it just becomes this gigantic dead zone. This whole process it's called eutrophication, and when it's caused by humans, such as in our example, it's called artificial or cultural eutrophication. Either word it's used interchangeably. So here's a summary. So here on the left, you can see beautiful, healthy water. Notice that there are some trees and grass nearby, and the water is clear, and there's a nice balance of life. But then sediments, nitrogen, phosphorus, that's usually the stuff that's in fertilizers. And you can see that the tree and the grass is now gone, and suddenly all this stuff is getting in the water. Water's getting cloudy, the algal blooms, clouds up the water, and everything starts to die because there's less oxygen. This is something you might have seen happen in the news. It also can be called red tide. It is... and sometimes it looks red, and that has to do with the bacteria, cyanobacteria, that lives with the algae. So it can cause different colors, and it can have all these horrifying impacts. And this is incredibly common around the world, as you can see on the map. So now what I would like for you to do is summarize the process for me. How does farming contribute to eutrophication? Now, a word about these fertilizers that's causing the whole thing. Synthetic chemical fertilizers are the ones that tend to contribute to surface runoff. And that's because they tend to feed the plant, but they don't tend to stay in the soil very well. Usually with an organic, more natural fertilizer, it boosts the soil, and it causes more helpful microbes to live in the soil. So it benefits the plant too. It's usually a bit... and it does that. So my question now to you is, why are these fertilizers being used by farmers if it's causing all this damage? Well, let's look at this from the perspective of the farmers. Now, obviously they have a business to run, but it's so much more than that. Because back in the 1950s in particular, which is when chemical fertilizers really started to be a lot more around the world, there was a lot of population pressure to increase food efficiency, to grow lots and lots of food. So it's not just making money off of growing food. We desperately need farmers. We need to support more people, and not just to feed the world, but we have 1 billion people on planet Earth who are malnourished. And, there's a lot of pressure to grow food really fast to feed these bellies. So now what I would like for us to do is to brainstorm some solution. How can we stop or prevent artificial eutrophication while still meeting the needs of feeding the world? So what are your ideas?